All right, today's date is August 20th, 2003. This is the New Westminster Sports Oral History Project. Today's interviewee is Mr. Allan Brew. Allan, what is your full name?
Allan Clifford Brew.
And where were you born, and when?
Lloydminster, Saskatchewan, October the 14th, 1939.
And your marital status?
Married with 3 children.
And any grandchildren?
I believe it's 7 grandchildren.
Oh, really? Guess it changes every once in a while.
Yeah.
Where were your parents from?
My parents were born in Lloydminster, Saskatchewan.
So they're prairie people?
Yes. We lived in the Alberta side of Lloydminster, but we were born on the Saskatchewan side. That's where the hospital was.
Oh, okay. Right. So when did you make it? How did you get from Saskatchewan to New Westminster?
Yeah, well, my family moved to Ocean Falls in 1942, and my father worked in the sawmill portion of Pacific Mills at that time. There was a pulp mill up Ocean Falls. And in 1952, maybe I should go back, I started swimming when I was in Ocean Falls. In 1952, we moved down to New Westminster.
Okay.
My father, took a job with, I think it was a BC Manufacturing that was in the Queensboro area at that time. And
did you spend much of the rest of your life there, or?
We lived in Saffordham on Alberta Street from 1952 till 1956 when we moved out to Coquitlam, just off North Road.
Right.
And we lived there until 1972. I was sort of away and back home from about 1959 on, doing all sorts of different things, but my parents moved from Coquitlam in 1972 to Richmond, and my wife and I, Sheila, moved to Richmond, I believe, about 1969.
And now you're here.
And now we're here. We've been in Ladner for 8.5 years.
Right. So can you tell me your current address?
4339 41 B Street.
Okay. Good.
Ladner.
So, Ladner.
Yeah.
Well, getting into the sports sort of aspect of the interview, what sort of sports did you first get involved in as a child?
Well, living in Ocean Falls, they had a 20-yard swimming pool, indoor swimming pool, and so virtually every kid in Ocean Falls swam. Other than that, they had Little League Baseball, which I played, and I would have started Little League Baseball at the age of 8 or 9, which is about the time that I started swimming. I started swimming, I believe, when I was 9. And really, because that was about all there was in Ocean Falls, Little League Baseball and swimming, that's all we did. So when I left there when I was 12 years old and came down to New Westminster, by that time I was so involved in swimming, and swimming is sort of a 7 days a week endeavor, and actually, even twice a day, 7 days a week, with maybe 2 weeks off a year.
Really, even at that age?
Well, at that age, at the age of 12, yes, I was. At that time, I was probably only swimming 5 days a week, because at that time I had to get to Vancouver, because the pool in New Westminster at the old YMCA was only 15 yards long. When you swim in a international pool, at that time the Empire Pool that was 55 yards long. Well, so my coach Noel used to drive me to Vancouver to the old Crystal Pool every Tuesday, and I think we trained at the Y about twice a week. And then I'd get myself to Vancouver via the old Pacific Stage Line bus a couple of extra times a week, so it would amount to about 5 times a week. And then other than that, I would be out, doing either calisthenics or running or whatever.
Really? So constantly training, really?
Constantly training, and I loved it. I loved the training more than I loved the competition.
And this is, oh, really? And this is when you lived in Saverton, is that right?
Yes.
Right. So, at the age of 12, you're doing this amount of training, and how long did you stay in sort of your sports career?
Well,
your swimming career, I should say.
At the age of 14 was when I swam in the Canadian Championships in Vancouver. It was the dual Canadian Championships and British Empire Game Trials, and that was when I won 5 junior championships, which was 16 in our competition, and then I was third in the men's 110 backstroke in the men's competition, and that's what got me into the Empire Games. So I continued swimming till about the age of 18. Mm. My coach, Noel, retired when I was, basically right after the British Empire Games, and I think I mentioned to you earlier that coaches don't get the credit they're due. Mm. Because it made a drastic difference to my career when Noel quit, and I never did as well again after that as I had with Noel as my coach.
Is that just because of the relationship that you end up having?
I think she understood me, and when you think of it, you've done millions of strokes. The way that coach wants you to do it. Mm-hmm. And after doing that, you have somebody else come along and tell you to do it differently. Mm-hmm. It's very, very difficult, and that's what happened to me, that my next coaches were trying to totally change my stroke and so on. And I went from 5 gold medals when I was 14 in junior competition to the next year I think I had 2 gold medals, and I think when I was 16, which is the oldest you can be at that level, I think as a 16-year-old, I think I probably had 1 gold medal, and then silvers, golds, silvers and bronzes and so on. So I tapered off, and then I probably had my, in terms of times and so on, when I was 16, 17 years old, I did my best times, and but didn't accomplish as much in terms of winning.
It sounds like you weren't enjoying it as much either at the time.
I think I was struggling a little bit, because when you've had the success that I had when I was 14, and then you expect to, I got better, but I didn't improve at the rate that I would have expected to. Mm. And I feel that was because of the change in coaches. Mm. And I think Noel and I had a really, maybe a special relationship where I totally believed in it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important, to believe in your coach. Mm-hmm. And I think, I don't think I ever believed in another coach the way I did in Noel, so that you sort of got the brakes on a little bit when you're doing as you're told, if you don't really believe what you're being instructed to do.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I think that had a big effect on me later on. So I did a little bit of running, but it was just I ran the mile a bit, and that was only through the running I was doing for my swimming, and I ended up running the mile in the Fraser Valley track meet, and then I think I was second in the mile in the Fraser Valley track meet, and then they had a centennial meet in 1958 that I ended up running. And you mentioned that, or you asked if I was involved in any other sports, and that was about it, just because of the amount of time that the swimming took. Mm-hmm. I always followed all the other sports. I was always interested in lacrosse and hockey and track and field and all that sort of stuff.
Well, we'll get back to that. First of all, tell me what the training, what did that encompass?
Well, when we were, let's say when I was 15 years old, actually when I was 16, I'll take the year that I was 16, because by that time I was driving. And so this would show, what swimmers and other athletes go through. I lived in Coquitlam, and I'd get up at 4:30 in the morning. And we had to be in the water out at UBC, which was an outdoor pool. And so we would start training out there in about April. And I would pick up a fellow named John Anderson at Springer and Lougheed. And I guess I'd pick up John at about 5:15. Actually, probably more like about 5, and we'd be out at UBC and in the water at 5:45. And outside,
cold.
That was the Empire pool.
Mm.
Well, the pool was heated, but it wasn't as warm as they are today. And I would then drive John, drop him off at work. He worked for Grinnell. And then I'd drive home to Coquitlam, have my breakfast, go to school. And then after school, I'd drive back to Vancouver to the old Crystal Pool on Beach Avenue and train again in the afternoon. And that twice a day routine would probably be 4 or 5 times a week, and then you would train once a day the other 3 days. Back in my day, they didn't know anything about tapering and shaving down and all that sort of stuff. And by tapering, and now I believe that swimmers or athletes taper off when they're coming to a big event.
What do you mean?
Well, they taper off so that maybe their training, they cut down on the amount of training in terms of distances and the quantity of training.
Right.
In our day, we trained on the Friday just as hard as we did 2 weeks earlier for a meet that we're going in on Saturday.
Really?
Right up to the meet, there's been an awful lot of technology that's come along since I swam. So that was pretty typical during that period. And then in the winter again, by this time, I wasn't swimming at the Y in U.S. Minster at all. All my training was in Vancouver, so I would be driving to Vancouver, once or twice a day.
Right. And when you swam, what sort of styles did you swim specifically?
Well, in the Empire Games, I swam in the only stroke that I was terrible at was butterfly.
Okay.
And I won. That one year when I was 14, I won the Canadian Championship in the 110 and the 220 breaststroke, and the 110 and 220 backstroke, and the 220 freestyle or crawl. Later on, my top strokes were basically breaststroke and backstroke. And I was always known as a backstroker.
Oh, really?
But I was, backstroke was... I swam in the Empire Games as a backstroker, and the Pan American Games, and also the American Nationals in '56 was always a backstroker.
Right.
Yeah, so that was my main stroke.
Right. Explain to me a little bit about what the facilities were like. I mean, you were at the Y, the Crystal Pools, you said, and UBC. Just describe.
Okay, the New Westminster Y was 15 yards long, which is a push off and a few strokes. That's literally, and it was a dungeon. It was terrible.
Oh, was it?
It was a terrible place, and rough. The water is very rough, and so on. And that's something they paid attention to in later years, is the design of pools so that the waves sort of go over the sides of the pool, so you don't have all the waves bouncing back at you. So, Crystal Pool. Everybody loved the old Crystal Pool. It was 32 yards long, and every time we had a meet, they had to block the end off to make it into, in those days, with 25 yards rather than 25 meters. And but it was half salt and half fresh water, and everybody did their best times in the old Crystal Pool. And it was it was an old pool, but it was really a comfortable pool. Everybody liked swimming there.
Why would they do their best times there?
Because of the salt water, more buoyancy.
Oh, really?
Well, if you swim in the ocean as opposed to a lake, salt water is, you've heard of the various salt lakes and so on, and you can lie and read a newspaper because it's so buoyant. So it actually made a difference. I mean, you wouldn't think so, but I don't know whether it was psychological, but Most people did their best times at the old Crystal Pool.
And that was indoor or outdoor?
That was indoors.
That was indoors.
And as the New Westminster Y was indoors, and then UBC was 55 yards. Yes, and it was built for the British Empire, the 1954 British Empire Games. And the nice thing about the shorter pools, I think in those days, we used to always think we got a rest when we hit the end of the pool for a turn, but the way things have gone in more recent years, the way they turn, it's no rest anymore. I mean,
it's a big push, eh?
It takes a lot of energy to do the turns the way they do these days.
Oh, does it?
Well, yeah, in our day, you'd grab the wall and sort of the gutter and sort of lean into it and almost have a rest for a second. So most of us enjoyed the shorter pools, not the 15, but your Crystal Pool and stuff like that. And, Ocean Falls, where I started, that was a 20-yard pool, and I remember this day was 88 lengths to a mile. So
88 lengths to a mile.
Yeah. So.
And so, would you regularly do a mile swimming?
You do way more than that. Like a typical training session, would be maybe a couple of miles, but it would be broken up of the various strokes, and some arms only, some kicking only, different stuff like that. So in later days, then you do a few sprints and so on. And in later days, they, as I was getting out of swimming, they were getting introduced to interval training, or sprint, rest, sprint, rest, sprint, rest. And I think it was John Landy, who was in the, not John Landy, Roger Bannister, who was in the 54 Empire Games. He was, he broke, first man to break the 4-minute mile.
Right.
I believe that he may have been the first guy that really used interval training.
Right.
I heard that he was training 45 minutes a day because he was busy with his studies, and what he did in those 45 minutes was interval training, doing quarter miles and a rest, quarter mile and a rest, and he broke the world record doing it. Later on, it came into swimming and I guess other sports. But you just we used to. Swim a half mile of this and a quarter mile of this and a half mile of that sort of thing. And that was typical.
Right. Every time you went swimming, would you have a coach with you, or sometimes you just go?
I would say that in my early days with Noel would be with me 2 out of, if I swam 5 sessions at that time, she would have been there 2 times.
Okay.
And so the majority of your training was done without your coach.
Right.
But in the case of the Vancouver Amateur Swim Club, where most of my friends swam there, the coach was virtually there every time.
Really? And they worked on technique and stuff like that?
My recollection is I had difficulty getting my elbows up, and just lifting your elbows, and you could swear that you're lifting your elbows, and not, within reason. And the Noel was, technique. I think people felt that I probably had one of the best techniques around, and I think maybe I did, because it would have been technique and not strength that allowed me as a 14-year-old to beat all the 16-year-olds. So Noel was a great technician.
Right. Now, when you swam, did you belong to any sort of specific clubs or anything like that?
Well, in New Westminster, I belonged to the Crescent Beach Swim Club, which Crescent Beach is, where that is. Well, I guess Crescent Beach had a summer club, and that continued on in the winter in New Westminster, and I guess an awful lot of the kids in the club in Crescent Beach lived in New Westminster, so
I see.
It just
so that was
stayed with the name Crescent Beach. Then later, when Noel retired, I joined the Vancouver Amateur Swim Club in Vancouver, and then for a while I belonged to the Dolphin Swim Club with a coach named Howard Furby.
Now, sorry, go on.
Go ahead. No.
So, when did the Hayek Swim Club sort of?
I think they were Quite a few years later, long after I was.
Oh, it was.
I think Ron Jacks, I believe, was a coach at that time, and Ron was probably 6-7 years younger than I am.
Oh, I see. So the Crescent Beach Swim Club, that was made up, you said, of a lot of New Westminster kids. Was it generally for youth then?
Yeah, actually swimming generally is. You don't find, well, it might be a little bit different today, but in my day, when I swam for Crescent Beach, probably the oldest swimmer may have been 17 or 18.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
And talking about Crescent Beach, in the summer, I stayed with Noel in Crescent Beach in 1953, and our training was done out in the Crescent at Crescent Beach with logs. The pool was boxed in with logs and floats, and Noel would go out to the pool for 15 feet in a rowboat, and we'd have to sort of wade out there, and it was 8 o'clock in the morning out in the ocean. Train was not fun.
Cold.
Yeah, so that, you would never see that today in any competitive swimming.
Well, I guess
those kind of conditions.
They have pools everywhere now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't think too many other clubs ever did any training out in the ocean like we did. So.
Right. So you obviously had to take part in swim meets. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And how would you do that? Would you do that as the club, or would you do that on your own?
As a club.
As a club.
Yeah, you represented a certain club when you went to a meet.
Oh, okay. And how did that work?
Well, I don't think anybody was really they didn't keep track of points. Like I think maybe I've seen some, like in the American universities, you'll watch some of those swim meets, and they go as a team and they get a certain number of points for first, second, thirds, and so on. There was never any of that sort of thing. It was just you belonged to a club, trained as a club, and traveled as a club, but you basically swam as an individual.
Mm. So there was sort of a team there.
Yeah, it was a team, right. But there is no sort of official records of which team did the best or anything like that. It was,
in local meets, I noticed in your scrapbook that there was articles from the Royal Columbian, or the British Columbian, I'd imagine.
Royal Columbian.
The Royal Columbian. Mm-hmm. So would there be reporters coming to these local meets and things like that?
I guess there may have been, but, I don't know where they got their information from. Probably in my whole career, I was maybe interviewed about 3 or 4 times.
Right.
So they may have been around, and I don't know, or maybe they just, I don't know how to get their information. But no, swimming wasn't a big sport in those days. I think your track and field and a lot of the other sports were much more popular than swimming. So I don't think it was a sport that many newspaper people would attend.
Right. But would there be an audience when you took part in the meet?
Probably more parents and brothers and sisters and everything else. The British Empire Games, it was different, of course.
Right.
And you had the stands were filled with a lot of people, but most of your meets, there might be seating for a couple hundred people maximum, and you'd probably have that many parents there because if you've got 100 kids, you've got a couple hundred parents. So
right.
In those days, you would have a couple hundred parents.
Yeah, I guess
as opposed to today,
yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, describe to me a little bit about some of the different championships that you took part in. I mean, you mentioned Empire Games and things like that. But
I guess my first Canadian, I can't remember the Canadian or BC championship was in North Vancouver when I was about 10 years old. I still lived in Ocean Falls. And then in 1953, we went to the Canadian Championships in Winnipeg. That's the first one I recall for sure. The various BC championships and so on, I can't really recall too much about those.
Sounds like
they weren't a big deal.
Right.
But we used to come down from Ocean Falls and go to the Kelowna Regatta, from the time I was about 10 years old, and then 1954, the British Empire Games in Vancouver, and we were constantly going to Seattle and Portland and places like that for swim meets. And in 1955, I went to the Pan American Games in Mexico.
What was that?
Mexico City. It was pretty interesting for myself. It was that was a lot of fun. Okay. Actually, I had more fun at the 1954 British Empire Games than I did at any other event. We had a key to the city and that sort of thing. So,
what is?
Okay. 1955 was the Pan American Games, and then 1956 we went back to Ontario for the Canadian Championships that year, and then also I went to Daytona Beach, Florida for the American Masters that year. And then 1957, I think it was, we went to Montreal that year for the Canadian Championships. And I think that was the last Canadian Championship I swam in. It'd be 1957. And, in the meantime, we'd probably be going to various meets all over the Northwest, about maybe a couple of meets a month, that sort of thing. And
that many, hey?
It would change with the season.
Right.
But I think in a typical year, I don't know, maybe we would, it may not have been quite that much, but I would say we'd probably be in maybe 18 meets a year. So
every few weeks then.
Yeah.
and was that just to keep you?
Well, no, various people would have swim meets for, there'd be all these annual meets, and then, as a team, I guess the powers to be would decide which ones we would go to and so on. And I guess that was the reason that we were training, was to go on meets and test yourself against others and that sort of thing.
Right. Were there any sort of people that you particularly had rivals with or wanted to beat?
Not really, other than I can recall the fellow that sort of took over from myself. I was the top Canadian backstroker for several years.
Right.
And a fellow named Bob Wheaton was the guy that, from Victoria, I think in about probably 1957 or 58, I think beat me for the first time. He was a couple of years younger than I was, and
so you were probably the goal for him.
I would have been, because I held most of the backstroke Canadian records, and after a while they talk about it being harder to stay at the top and get to the top, and
I see.
And it's true. Once you're at the top for a few years, and everybody's aiming at you, and
right.
I don't think I was a great competitor. As I said earlier, I loved training, but I didn't have the killer instinct that others had.
Well, you must have had some, because you won a few.
But I didn't have that. I sort of wonder to myself, if I'd had the real killer instinct, I think I could have done much more than I did.
Oh, I see. Right. So when you say you enjoyed the training more, is it just because you liked being in the water?
No, I loved, I don't know, I just liked the hard work of it. And I did like doing time trials, so, which we at Ocean Falls, we used to do a lot of time trials. At the end of almost every session, George Gates was my coach at that time, and George was a great coach. And George would do a few time trial, or, just to have you swim a few. Up there it was 40-yard sprints, or, and time us. And so I think I got into the habit of wanting to see how fast I, went today and that sort of stuff. And it's a little bit the same as golf. You practice. It wouldn't be much fun if you didn't play any games.
Yeah.
You play the game to see what sort of improvement you've made.
Mm.
And it's the same with swimming. I would be probably as interested in the swim meets to see what my time was. I could have done it with no other competition. There are some people that just love that competition with the others there. I could have done it being the only person in the pool just to see what my time was that day.
Mm-hmm. So did you sometimes work at breaking your own personal record? Is that...
Well, every time you swam, you were trying to do that.
Right.
And it's like, I was always trying to improve upon what I had done. The interesting thing is that this friend, John Anderson, that I mentioned earlier, and we had both basically retired from swimming in about 1958, and we were playing water polo. He phoned me up one day and said, there's a swim meet down at the University of Washington. How'd you like to go in it? And so John and I trained seriously, and by seriously, we just trained 3 days a week for about a month. Mm. And both of us did the best times of our careers.
Really?
And what it sort of said to us is that we were sort of overtraining when we were younger. We were just, John lived a little further out the way I did, not quite as far. And we talked about that a lot, John and I did, about, I wonder if we overdid it. If we may have been able to go faster if we hadn't trained as much.
Right. So, but it goes back to what you're talking about, the tapering, the tapering. Yeah. Right, and also taking your breaks, and stuff like that too, maybe.
Well, that was a little different. That was sort of interval training where you sprint, rest for 30 seconds, sprint, rest for 30 seconds. It's a little bit different situation. But,
explain to me, or tell me about, you've told me about some of the championships you were in. Tell me about some of the successes that you've had.
Well, I guess starting out when I was in Ocean Falls, a success would be to make the swim team. So you got a trip out of Ocean Falls. That was the big carrot up there. It was every kid wanted to be on. You were isolated up there. The only way to get in was by. I guess it started in Ocean Falls where we would have had swim meets up there, and they would have an aggregate trophy for the swimmer who won the most races or whatever. And I won those trophies up there. And then at the Kelowna Regatta, when I was quite young, we'd come down and they would have an aggregate trophy for the person who won the most races, and I won that. But I guess to me, my biggest accomplishment would be 1954, winning 5 gold medals in junior competition, which is 16 and under competition when I was only 14 years old. That, I would say, was my greatest accomplishment, and I just wish that I'd been able to build on that. Going to Mexico for the Pan American Games, I made the team, but I don't think it was, I made the team because I was the fastest backstroker in Canada, but I didn't really do that well at the Pan American Games. And the 1956 American Nationals, I was 6th in the 220-yard backstroke, and my time was 2:29 something. And breaking the 2:30 mark was important to me.
Was it? Yeah.
And I guess along the line, I was breaking the Canadian records in the 110 and the 220 and so on backstroke.
Breaking records, like Canadian records?
Canadian records.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I guess, every time you did that, it's not something that at the time you really thought about. I think today I look back on it, and I wish I appreciated back then what was happening, the way I do now. I think we all just took it for granted. You never, when you went to a swim meet and you swam and you did well or you didn't, and you went off and did your thing, and there wasn't, nobody really thought about it too much.
Maybe that's youth. Maybe
it probably is,
yeah.
And I think I'm more proud of what I did today than I was back then.
Oh, really?
At the same time, with the technology and the advancement of swimming, I'm almost embarrassed to mention what my times are today because, they're so slow compared with what they're doing these days.
Are they?
Well, it's the same with every sport, every measured sport. When it comes to lacrosse and hockey and so on, nothing's measured, so you can't measure it the way you can a high jumper,
a runner,
and all that sort of stuff. And I would say that winning the Vicky Andrew Trophy in 1954 as the U.S. Mistress Athlete of the Year was an accomplishment, and but I think I mentioned to you earlier. I think of guys like Dave McDonald, who was an all-round athlete, and various other guys that were all-around athletes were probably more deserving of it than I was. I mean, I got it for doing one sport, although I guess most winners do get it for one sport.
Yeah.
But no, I can't think of any other great accomplishments other than those.
Oh, those are good. Those are good. The Empire Games, you were involved in that. Were you also a spectator there?
Yes, but we didn't get to see too much.
Because you were swimming.
Because we were swimming. I missed the Miracle Mile with John Landy and John Bannister, and then I don't know if you ever heard about the marathon with a guy named Jim Peters.
Yes, I've heard.
I missed that. I'm trying to remember what events I did see other than the swimming, but we were so busy training.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people realize, they think you go to the Olympic Games or the Empire Games and you do all these things. Well, you go, but you're so busy doing your training and all that sort of stuff, you don't really have much time to take in everything that's happening.
Right.
But I really enjoyed the whole atmosphere of the thing because, like I say, I was 14. I was the youngest competitor of all the countries. Male competitor. We had a girl named Sarah Barber that was 13 on our team.
So you were the youngest male of all the countries? All
the countries. And then there was a girl named Sarah Barber that was 13, and there was a girl from Australia was 14. So I think we had the two youngest competitors in the games that year.
So that must have been an honor.
I think when I look back on that now, I'm more impressed with it than I was at the time. That how young I was, because I see kids that are 14 years old now, and I think I was swimming against men when I was I was 5'8" and 136 pounds, and I remember that because we had a stat book that we had to all our statistics were taken and put into this book, and I remember this day I was 5'8", 136. So I wasn't that big, and swimming against a guy named George Park, for instance, who was a Hamilton policeman. George was about 22, and he was about 6'2" and 210 pounds. So
big difference.
I didn't swim against George. He was 110 freestyle swimmer.
Right. How did you do in the Empire Games?
I didn't make the finals.
Right.
And I think because we were the host country, we were allowed to have 3 competitors in each event. And so if you were the 3rd fastest Canadian, you basically made that event. And that was the case in my situation. And I think the total team was 33 swimmers.
Right.
I can't remember how many were men and how many, and that included divers. So I was one of 33 men and women in those games.
So you placed 3rd in the men's at the age of 14, is that right?
As a Canadian. In Canada, yeah.
In Canada. So how were your parents in your swimming career? Were they supportive Did they take part in some way?
They were very supportive. My father worked a lot of hours, so he got to most of the, to as many meets as he could. But I can remember to this day, most of my training, I got there somehow on my own, where I'd go to Vancouver and you had most of the parents who had driven their kids there. I can remember when I was 13 years old, and after school, I would catch the Pacific Stage Line bus outside. At that time, it was Vincent Massey Junior High, and I'd take the bus and I'd get off where the Queen Elizabeth Theatre is now, and I'd walk about 2 miles from there to the pool.
Really?
Train, and then after my training, I'd walk back there to the Pacific Stage Lines bus, take the bus, and it used to come to where the Royal Towers Hotel is. And I used to walk down to Columbia Street and along Columbia Street in front of the old BC Penitentiary to my house in Saffordham, and I'd get home maybe 9:30 at night. And this is through the winter, and it's dark, and I'm 13 years old. And it was years later, when I was driving all sorts of kids around to hockey practice and so on with my children, that I realized that in all those years, there were all the Vancouver amateur kids training at the same pool, Crystal Pool at the time, and most of their parents drove them there. And I can't remember ever anybody offering me a ride. And I just thought about this years later as I'm driving, all these kids around, and I used to. Yeah, that was actually, I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
That I got myself there by bus and got myself back and all the walking, and I think that ended up being a part of my training.
For sure.
And at that time, I used to work on Sundays it was called Glenwood Service, the foot of Gilly on Marine Drive. It was about 7 or 8 miles from my house, and I used to ride my bike there to work, and I used to work about 12 or 14 hours and ride my bike home to Saffordham. I think I started out making around 35 cents an hour.
Really? Really?
So,
and you're still involved in that sort of stuff, are you?
I was still swimming at the time.
Really?
But it was a sort of thing where, I might do some calisthenics that day, or when you think of it, just the cycling of 14 or 16 miles, whatever it was. I think that all, without my knowing it, was a part of my training.
Yeah, I bet. You mentioned earlier that you used to watch other athletes in New Westminster, lacrosse and all these sorts of things. Yeah. Why did you do that?
Well, lacrosse-wise, I think my first recollection would be more of the old New Westminster Royals, where you had guys like Gordy Fashaway and Bobby Love and Jim Bedard and Bobby Bergeron, I think his name was, and all those guys. And I guess it was a very high-profile sport in Ocean Falls, and so...
Ocean Falls?
In New Westminster. At the time, and I wasn't really that interested in it as much as just aware of it.
Right.
And then with lacrosse, a lot of the guys that I went to school with played lacrosse.
Right.
Guys like Wayne Shuttleworth and Merv Schweitzer, a couple and Bill Wilkes, a little older than I was. So a lot of the guys you went to school with were playing these sports. And then track and field, his friend John Anderson and I used to go to all the track meets. And
did you?
We were always aware of world times and all the events and so on. And to this day, I almost have more of an interest in following track and field results and so on than I do swimming.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really? So would you go to any sort of games, lacrosse games or anything like that, or did you have time for that sort of stuff?
No, I didn't. Later on in life, my own sons played all those sports.
Oh, did
hockey,
they?
lacrosse, like they both played junior A hockey and junior A lacrosse. And basketball and football and soccer. Richard played rugby. They played all those sports, and actually I'm glad they did, because I knew if they swam, they wouldn't be able to do all that.
Right.
If you're involved in sports like swimming, gymnastics, figure skating, some of those individual sports, you can't do anything else.
Yeah.
That's all. If you want to do well at that sport, you can't do anything else.
Right.
And so I was happy that my children took the other route.
Right. Tell me about some of the friendships that you have that have formed because of your involvement in swimming.
Well, I guess the one fellow that, because I in later years when I was 16 and I could drive, I used to pick up this fellow, John Anderson. John came over from Scotland in 1953, I guess, and we trained a lot together. Although he swam for Vancouver Amateur and I swam for Crescent Beach in the early days. I'd like to say that I could think of a lot more friendships. I would say probably more acquaintances, and one would be Doug Hepburn, who was the world's strongest man, and he won the gold medal in the weightlifting back in those days. And I was involved with Doug for a short while. I made him up some weightlifting bars.
Oh, yeah.
I got to know him a little bit. He was in the 1954 Empire Games.
Oh, was he?
Actually, he won the World Championship in 1953. Other than that, just all the guys that I swam with, we still... probably twice a year, we have get-togethers with a lot of the swimmers from going back to 1949. We had a get-together recently where a guy named Bob Baird from Ocean Falls, I ran into him at a little coffee shop. He came over. I hadn't seen Bob for 20 years, and at that, I saw him once, and I hadn't seen him for probably 30 years prior to that in Ocean Falls.
No kidding.
Anyways, he came over and he asked me if I was Allan Brew, and I said, yes, I was. And he said, I'm Bob Baird. Anyways, I told Bob we were having this get-together, and there were people there, Ron Gilchrist from Ocean Falls. They're a well-known swimming family, and Helen Stewart. Actually, the last one was at Helen Stewart's house. And Helen Stewart was a world record holder and swam in Empires and Olympics and so on. And Ted Hunt. Helen married a guy named Ted Hunt, who is probably one of our British Columbia's best ever all-round athletes.
Really?
But there was Susan Sangster, who passed away a few years ago, but Susan would be there, and Mike Hutchison, who was a bit of a swimmer and then a coach after that. But we get together today on a regular basis. But I can't say that most of my friendships are outside the swimming group, and I spend so much time at work that I don't even. We probably have, one set of really good friends, and I still go to work 6.5 days a week, and a lot of guys over the years that if I look back, I'd say I admire. And Harry Nelson is one of those. He's one of your guys, and I can't say exactly why, but Harry was a sprinter, 100 and 200 man, and he just what I knew of Harry I really liked. And another guy I mentioned was Dave McDonald, who I don't think is on your list, but he was a heck of an athlete and a great guy. I didn't know him through my sport, although he used to, they had a summer place in Crescent Beach, and that's how I met Dave. But,
and you've mentioned Noel.
Noel was my coach, and there was a special bond between us. And, Noel was an Empire Games and Olympic swimmer, and she was a real lady, just very, very strict.
Oh, was she?
Very strict. And I think I was an ideal pupil for her, though, because I was there to train, and she was there to coach people who wanted to train.
Right.
So that the relationship was because, most of the others were there for social reasons, and I wasn't. I was there to swim, and I can recall one time that I was standing around with some of the guys from the Vancouver Amateur Swim Club, and we were squirting water back and forth, just standing around BSing, and Noel told me later, she said, "I don't bring you to Vancouver to socialize. You either come to train or don't."
Oh, really?
And that happened once. And and that was probably, towards the end of her coaching me, that, no, I think I was an ideal pupil, and she was, for her, and she was an ideal coach for me.
And you still maintain contact, is that right?
Yeah, we try to take her out for dinner, say on Valentine's Day, stuff like that. We see her a couple of times a year. We take her out to the Black Forest restaurant normally on King George Highway.
King George Highway.
To this day, she's still very sharp and a real lady.
Do you feel that something like sports is important to a town like New Westminster?
Yes.
In what way?
I think it's important to well, it's important to the athletes for one thing, just for the obvious reasons of the fitness aspect and all that sort of stuff. But I think it's sort of neat that people, I think of the Chilliwack Chiefs that I mentioned that we owned for quite a while.
Oh, right.
Well,
didn't talk about that.
the Chilliwack Chiefs, when we first went out there, they had a ragtag team, and we went out there and we gave them a team that they could be proud of, and it's sort of, once or twice a week, they get to go and see their team, and there'd be, anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 fans there.
Really?
In the stands, and it's a pride thing. If you can give your community something to be proud of. And I guess maybe with individual athletes, it's amazing how, you take an actor, Michael J. Fox, or whoever it might be, you might have somebody that's proud to say they're from Burnaby because that's where Michael J. Fox is from. It's the same way with certain athletes, I guess very high-profile athletes. People say, "Oh, I know him." So, I think it. People tend to want to they're proud to say that they know or
be associated
with top athletes. I can't say I was in that category, but you think of your high profile types like your Tiger Woods and all that sort of stuff. So I think it really has an importance. Have you seen the movie Seabiscuit?
No.
Well, it falls into the category of what you just said. That but in that particular case, the whole American country or the United States sort of grabbed on to Seabiscuit as the underdog, and I think it lifted the whole country up during a period of depression.
Right.
And I think that sort of thing can happen in any community where you're just whether it's a trail. Back in the 60s, a fellow named Willie Krause went there. He was an Olympic decathlon athlete, and he went up there as a coach. And they started sending international athletes, track and field athletes, out of trail. Why trail? It's a little town, same as Ocean Falls. And New Westminster, I think New Westminster can be proud of themselves because they've always had top athletes. I don't know about today as much as if you go back into the 50s and 40s, 50s, 60s. New Westminster was known across Canada for their lacrosse teams and so on. And I think that allows the people of the community to be proud of the community just because of their sports teams.
Right. No, that's good. Do you think there's anything apart in this interview that I've missed or that you'd like to add?
Well, maybe something I'd like to add is that I'm almost 64 and I'm working 6.5 days a week, and I have my business. I'm building a new shop right now, and I find that I'm maybe striving to do in business what I failed to accomplish in swimming.
Oh yeah.
That I reached a certain level, but I look back and I think I could have worked harder. And as hard as I worked, I feel I could have worked harder. And I'm trying to make sure that it doesn't happen again from a business point of view.
Right.
I think I'm still striving, for that. And we're going through an exciting period right now where we're building a new building, and also become involved in a couple more businesses and stuff like that. So that's about the only thing.
Good. Well,
and I think a lot of that comes from my involvement in sports in the early days. My work ethic that Noel was a big part of instilling in me. When I was 12, 13, 14, I think is what has gotten me to where I am right now.
And actually, that's one of the questions I just realized I forgot to ask was how has sports impacted your life? And you mentioned this thing about work ethic and stuff like that. Anything else about that in terms of meaning or significance, or in terms of how it's changed your life because you've been, you trained so hard and you were swimming?
I think maybe it was just the way I was, and my father was a hard worker, and maybe part of it came from that, that I was a hard worker. But I think I've got a real thing about fitness. I feel that if I'm healthy and fit, that I can do a better job at whatever I do. And I think having gone through the process of training and all those sort of things makes it easier for me today. I get upset with myself if I allow myself to get too unfit. And that has a big bearing on my business.
Right.
So.
Good. Well, thank you.
I don't know whether I answered the question or not.
Well, I think you did over the last 10 minutes.
A lot of words.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.